Waiter humiliates black customer, but is shocked to discover he is the true owner of the restaurant. In the pulsating heart of New York, young Emily, an ambitious waitress, finds herself in a moral dilemma that could cost her much more than her job at the sophisticated Grand Oak Bistro. As the city sparkles and elegant customers enter through the doors, the latent tensions of prejudice and disdain begin to manifest on a fateful night that will reveal the true nature of its characters. Emily has always dreamed of social ascent, believing that working at the Grand Oak Bistro could be her gateway to a better life. The daughter of a lower middle-class family, she carries a mix of ambition and resentment that makes her arrogant toward customers she considers inferior. For her, the experience at the restaurant is an opportunity to prove herself, but the reality of her environment is much more complex. The smiles of sophisticated customers hide disdainful glances, and the interactions in the restaurant reveal a world where respect and equality are merely distant ideals. The conflict begins to intensify when David, a black businessman who is the true owner of the bistro, decides to visit the establishment in disguise. Having overcome adversities to achieve success, he observes Emily with interest but also concern. Realizing the contempt she shows toward him, treating him like an ordinary customer, David questions the culture that permeates his own business. Meanwhile, Emily, believing that David is nothing more than an unimportant customer, makes a decision that could be devastating. That night, a special order from David leads Emily to a tragic choice. Instead of serving a delicious dish, she decides to sabotage the meal, hiding a dead rat in the food, thinking that this would help her get rid of a customer she considers unworthy. The act of contempt, however, does not go unnoticed. David, shocked, maintains his composure and calls Richard, the restaurant manager, who has already suspected Emily's behavior. Upon reviewing the security camera footage, the evidence of the discriminatory act becomes irrefutable. The confrontation that follows is a moment of revelations. Richard calls Emily into the office, where she finally comes face to face with David. Understanding who he truly is puts her in a vulnerable position, and the arrogance that sustained her begins to crumble. Richard informs her that she is fired and that David is determined to sue her for racial discrimination. The consequences of her actions are severe and immediate, and Emily finds herself facing an uncertain future, having to confront not only the loss of her job, but also the stain of a crime that will haunt her for a long time. As the story progresses, David and Richard work together to establish a new culture of respect and inclusion at the Grand Oak Bistro. They implement training policies that encourage the staff to treat all customers with dignity, transforming the restaurant into a symbol of justice and equality in the heart of New York. Emily's journey, marked by her devastating failure, leads her to a profound reflection on her beliefs and values, while David in turn becomes an agent of change, challenging the culture of prejudice he himself faced. In this emotional portrait, the struggle against prejudice and the pursuit of justice reveal human fragilities and the need for understanding and empathy in a world that often seems divided. The atmosphere at the Grand Oak Bistro was tenser than usual. Busy nights were common, but today there was something different in the air. Emily, while setting the table for the next customer, felt a knot in her stomach. The dismissal she had faced and the possibility of a racial discrimination lawsuit weighed heavily on her. She knew her life was about to change, but what tormented her most was the open wound of her wounded pride. As a young woman full of dreams, she could not imagine that an act of contempt would lead her down such a dark path. Meanwhile, David tried to remain calm. What began as a disguised visit to better understand the workings of his own restaurant had now turned into a bitter experience. He had not only witnessed the dehumanization of a customer, but also the exposure of a problematic culture that permeated his business. He felt the responsibility to act, not only to protect himself, but to ensure that no one else would go through what he had faced throughout his life. The pain of contempt and discrimination was not new to him, but the intensity of the betrayal from someone who was supposed to provide service hurt him deeply. Richard, the bistro manager, was torn. On one hand, he needed to protect the restaurant's name and ensure that the culture of respect was restored. On the other hand, he had a certain empathy for Emily. She was a young woman with potential, someone he had seen strive to please and stand out. However, the act of sabotage could not be ignored. Richard had the difficult task of being the mediator between justice and compassion, a role that tormented him. As the days went by, the news of Emily's dismissal spread quickly. The stigma of racial discrimination and the accusation of sabotage followed her like a shadow. She found herself isolated, facing disdainful looks even outside the bistro. The people who once admired her ambition now avoided her, and loneliness knocked at her door. What was once a dream of ascent now seemed like a nightmare. The reflection in the mirror showed not just a young woman with hopes, but a lost woman, questioning her beliefs, her character, and the very essence of who she was. With the forced free time, Emily began to reflect more on her actions and what had led her to such a point. Her disdain for David was not merely a matter of social class, it was a projection of her own insecurity. To feel superior, she had nestled into a bubble of prejudice, disregarding what truly mattered: dignity and respect among human beings. The life lessons that once seemed distant were now in front of her, demanding that she confront them, body and soul. David, on the other hand, was beginning to establish himself as a leader at the bistro. With Richard's help, he started to implement diversity and inclusion training, seeking to transform the restaurant's culture. He wanted Grand Oak Bistro to be a space where everyone was treated with dignity, regardless of their background. However, he also knew he had to deal with what had happened. The wound caused by Emily could not be ignored, but he wondered if there was still room for redemption. David and Richard were on a mission for change, but resistance soon emerged. Some team members were reluctant to accept the new policies. The fear of the unknown made many cling to old habits, challenging David's vision. He felt that, despite all his efforts, the roots of prejudice were deep and hard to eradicate. It was a test of his inner strength, a challenge that forced him to confront his fears and insecurities as a leader. Emily, in her solitude, began to observe what was happening at the bistro from afar. The transformation that David and Richard were promoting was something she had never imagined. The idea that the restaurant could become a symbol of respect and inclusion struck her deeply. The nostalgia for a place she had once considered just a springboard for her ambition now mingled with a new desire for reconnection. Thus, Emily's inner conflict intensified. Her journey was far from over, and the battle between her wounded pride and her desire for growth became increasingly complicated. She found herself at a turning point where the lessons of life and the need for empathy began to shape her into a new person. And on this path of overcoming, the friendship that had once seemed impossible could become the key to her redemption. But first, she would have to face the demons that haunted her and make choices that would put her on a new course. Emily walked through the city, feeling the weight of each step. The streets that once seemed vibrant and full of life were now just a reflection of her sadness. She watched the people around her, their laughter and conversations, and felt as if she were trapped in a bubble of loneliness. What should have been a moment of growth and learning had now become a journey of pain and regret. Being let go from Grand Oak Bistro was not just a loss of a job, it was a loss of identity. As the days passed, the difficulties began to accumulate. Emily tried to pick herself up, but rejection was everywhere. The doors that had once opened for her now seemed to close. She applied for various job openings, but the responses were always the same: silence. Despair began to set in, and in moments of vulnerability, she found herself thinking about how her actions had triggered this negative spiral. What had started as a simple clash of egos had morphed into a nightmare that haunted her. Meanwhile, at Grand Oak Bistro, David and Richard were facing their own battles. Resistance within the team was growing. Many did not accept the new inclusion guidelines. Sarcastic comments and looks of disdain were common during team meetings. David realized that despite his efforts, he was fighting against a strong current. He felt increasingly isolated and questioned whether he was really making a difference. The voices of discontent echoed in his mind, creating an internal conflict that made him feel insecure as a leader. Richard, for his part, tried to be a mediator between David and the team, but this came with its own set of challenges. He found himself in a delicate position, trying to balance the need for change with the need to maintain team morale. The daily stress left him exhausted, and he felt the pressure mounting. Every criticism David received weighed on his conscience, and he wondered if he should have intervened more decisively when Emily's situation began to unravel. The emotional impact of these challenges began to affect David physically. He couldn't sleep well, often finding himself thinking about the nights Emily worked, full of dreams and hopes. Guilt consumed him. He wished for a way to connect with her, but pride and insecurity held him back from taking that step. The thought that he could have helped prevent the situation tormented him, and it manifested in his health. He began to experience constant headaches, and a fatigue that wouldn't go away. Emily, on the other hand, was in a state of deep reflection. Loneliness forced her to face her own weaknesses and prejudices. She remembered moments when she had belittled David, not just for his position, but for being different. The emotional scars she carried began to open up, revealing the insecurity that had guided her to act so cruelly. What was an internal struggle became a cry for help, and she realized she needed to do something about it. One night, while walking the streets in search of an open cafe, Emily saw a small bookstore that caught her attention. She decided to go in. The shelves filled with books welcomed her, and she allowed herself to get lost among the pages. In one of those books, she found a quote that resonated deeply. "True strength comes from recognizing our weaknesses." That phrase became a mantra in her mind, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. Over time, Emily began to write. She put her feelings, her insecurities, and most importantly, her reflections on discrimination and prejudice on paper. The act of writing became therapeutic. She decided that instead of letting herself be defeated, she would use her experience to help others. She started planning a community project aimed at promoting inclusion and empathy. What began as a desire for redemption transformed into a life mission. Before we continue with this touching story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any stories. And let us know in the comments which city you are watching this video from. Meanwhile, David and Richard realized they needed more than just internal changes. They decided to hold an open meeting with the entire team, where everyone could express their concerns and opinions about the new direction of the bistro. It was an opportunity to listen and be heard, and David, despite his fear, knew it was a necessary step. He wanted the team to understand that change was not a threat, but an opportunity for collective growth. In that meeting, the tension was palpable. Some employees were aggressive, while others were open to dialogue. David felt his heart race as he listened to the criticism, but he also realized that those moments of tension were essential. The vulnerability he exposed by sharing his story created a space for others to do the same. He was not alone in the fight against prejudice. The team also had their own stories of pain and overcoming. The path ahead was uncertain, but both Emily and David knew that the journey was not just about them. It was about what they could do together, even if one was far from the other. The fight against discrimination and the quest for inclusion was a battle for all, and in their hearts they felt that redemption was possible, but only if they were willing to look within and confront their own demons. Emily was becoming increasingly confused about her future. Writing helped her, but she still struggled to find a purpose. On a rainy afternoon, while reviewing her notes in a cozy cafe, she received a message from an old co-worker. He invited her to a talk on inclusion and diversity that would be held in the city. The event promised to bring together community leaders and provide space for important discussions. Initially hesitant, something inside her compelled her to accept the invitation. It was an opportunity to connect with others who, like her, were seeking a path to change. Upon arriving at the event, the vibrant atmosphere enveloped her. The voices of people passionate about inclusion and empathy echoed throughout the auditorium. Emily sat listening attentively to the stories shared, many of which resonated deeply with her own experiences. A woman who had faced discrimination in the workplace spoke about how she found strength in her vulnerability. Her words penetrated Emily's soul, making her reconsider her own struggles and how she had treated others during moments of insecurity. During a break, Emily decided to approach the woman who had spoken. She introduced herself and shared a bit of her story, including her dismissal and the feelings of regret that haunted her. The woman listened intently, and at the end of their conversation, said something that changed everything. True change begins when we forgive ourselves. You cannot change the past, but you can shape your future. That simple phrase became a turning point for Emily. She realized that to move forward, she needed to let go of the guilt that consumed her. Meanwhile, David found himself at a critical moment in his professional life. The meeting with the team had been a success, but the tension still lingered in the air. He knew that resistance to change would require time and patience. A week after the meeting, David received an unexpected email from a renowned food critic inviting him for an interview about the new guidelines for the bistro. The opportunity seemed promising, but the pressure to present the new vision left him anxious. He wondered if he truly had the capacity to lead the team toward a more inclusive future. That same night, as he prepared for the interview, David received a message from Richard. He was worried about the team and wanted to know how David was handling the pressure. David, feeling vulnerable, decided to open up to his friend, confessing his insecurities and fears. Richard, in response, shared his own journey of growth and the difficulties he faced while trying to mediate the tensions. The connection between the two strengthened, and David realized he was not alone in his struggle. On the day of the talk, Emily was radiant. The transformation she had felt in recent weeks inspired her to take action. Determined to make a difference, she decided to bring her notes and insights to a discussion group in the community. As she shared her story and her reflections on prejudice and inclusion, she saw the reactions of the people around her. The tears and smiles that emerged motivated her to keep going. Meanwhile, David was at the interview, nervous but determined. As he discussed his vision for the bistro, he remembered Richard's words about vulnerability and empathy. He spoke about the importance of embracing all team members, regardless of their differences. The critic, impressed by his sincerity, asked challenging questions, but David responded with firmness and clarity. He was finally starting to understand that true success wasn't just about recognition, but about creating an environment where everyone felt valued. The emotional impact of these experiences was profound. Emily felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She began to forgive herself, understanding that her mistakes did not define her, but rather her future actions did. David, for his part, began to see his role in the bistro not just as a leader, but as an agent of change. The connection he had with the team strengthened, and the idea that true leadership was about serving others became an undeniable truth. As they both walked toward their new beginnings, life challenged them to confront their past failures and prejudices. They learned that the journey of overcoming and acceptance was filled with ups and downs, but that together they could face the challenges that arose. And so, with renewed courage, each of them prepared to take the next step, ready to create a future where inclusion and empathy were the norm. Emily felt renewed after the talk. The connection she had made with the woman who shared her story left her feeling more confident. From that day on, she decided that she not only wanted to be heard, but also wanted to hear others. She began to meet with friends and acquaintances, organizing small gatherings in her apartment. It was a welcoming space where everyone was invited to share their stories, struggles, and achievements. In the early meetings, Emily noticed that many shared similar feelings. There was relief in knowing they were not alone. With each gathering, new voices joined the group, and each story brought a lesson. In one of those meetings, a young woman named Clara spoke about how the pressure to fit in had led her to distance herself from her true essence. Emily listened attentively, remembering how she herself had lost her way amid others' expectations. This identification drove her to share even more about her own journey, creating a safe space where everyone could open up. Meanwhile, David was facing a new challenge. After the interview, he received positive feedback, but the critique also pointed out aspects that needed attention. He knew that the team was still dealing with resistance to change, and the pressure to implement the new guidelines was palpable. David felt divided. On one hand, he was excited about the possibility of making a difference, but on the other, the fear of failure consumed him. The next day, upon arriving at the bistro, he noticed that the atmosphere among the staff was tense. Some people were still not convinced of the new vision and were reluctant to adapt. He was approached by a team member who expressed their frustrations. Why do we need to change? What was wrong with what we did before? The question hit David like a punch to the gut. He knew he needed to act, but how could he convince those who felt threatened? That night, while reflecting on the day, David decided he needed to be more vulnerable with his team. In a meeting, he opened his heart, sharing his own insecurities and the difficulties he faced to get where he was. He spoke of the changes not just as a necessity for the bistro, but as an opportunity for everyone to grow together. With this, he hoped to show that change was not a threat, but a chance to become a stronger and more united team. Emily, for her part, began to realize that despite the growth she was experiencing, there were still internal challenges to face. In one of her gatherings, a friend mentioned how the fear of failure often paralyzed them. That observation resonated deeply with her. In moments of solitude, Emily found herself wondering if she was truly on the right path. The supportive voices surrounded her, but doubt was always present, whispering that perhaps she was not capable of making a difference. Determined to confront those fears, Emily began to keep a journal. It was a way to release the thoughts that tormented her. With each page, she let go of a little bit of the weight she carried. Writing became a ritual for her, a safe space where she could explore her emotions without fear of judgment. In one of her entries, she reflected on the importance of being kind to herself and how that would help her be kinder to others. While Emily struggled with her insecurities, David was also facing new realities. During a meeting, a team member raised an important point. If we're talking about inclusion, we need more diversity in the decisions we make. David realized that, although he was trying to promote an inclusive environment, he still had not heard all the voices. This led him to rethink his approach. He decided that instead of just leading, he should create a space where everyone could contribute. In the following days, David began to implement open meetings where any team member could bring ideas and concerns. He encouraged active participation, seeking to build a culture of collaboration. Although there was initial resistance, slowly people began to open up. He realized that by giving voice to others, he was also allowing himself to learn and grow. The journey of both Emily and David was far from easy. Each faced their own fears and insecurities, but gradually they learned to support each other. In one of her meetings, Emily shared with the group how vulnerability can be a strength. David, for his part, began to share the victories and challenges he faced in the bistro, showing that change takes time and patience. Along this path, they discovered that progress was not linear. There were good days and bad days, but their mutual support and desire to grow together helped them face every obstacle. The connection they had formed, both with each other and with others, became the foundation of their transformation. And so, they began to chart a future that reflected not only their ambitions, but also their genuine desire to make a difference. Emily and David were on parallel journeys of self-discovery and overcoming challenges that tested their inner and outer strengths. Emily, feeling renewed by an inspiring lecture, decided that she wanted not only to be heard, but also to listen to others. In her meetings, she realized that many shared similar insecurities, creating a space for mutual support. Each story she heard reinforced the idea that vulnerability could be a powerful strength. This discovery encouraged her to confront her own fears, especially the fear of failure. David, on the other hand, was struggling with the weight of expectations in his work environment. After receiving constructive criticism in an interview, he felt torn between the excitement of implementing changes and the fear of failing. The tense atmosphere among the bistro staff made him even more insecure. When a team member questioned the need for change, David realized he had a significant challenge ahead: how to convince those who felt threatened by the new guidelines. While Emily used her journal as a safe space to explore her emotions, David decided to open his heart in a meeting. He began sharing his insecurities and the difficulties he faced throughout his career. This vulnerable attitude began to change the team dynamic. Instead of imposing changes, he sought to create an environment where everyone could contribute, recognizing that inclusion needed to be more than just a word. It had to be part of the bistro's culture. Both Emily and David were learning that overcoming challenges came not only from external achievements, but also from inner growth. Emily began to trust herself more, realizing that her struggles were a natural part of life and that sharing her experiences could help others. By writing about her feelings, she found clarity and a way to deal with her insecurities. Meanwhile, David started to see the importance of listening to his team's voices. He realized that by giving space for others to express themselves, he was not only promoting a collaborative environment, but also learning to cope with his own anxieties. The open meetings he implemented began to create bonds among team members, allowing everyone to feel part of the change process. David understood that true success was not just about achieving results, but about building a united and supportive team. Through their interactions, both Emily and David began to apply the lessons they learned. Emily became kinder to herself, understanding that excessive self-criticism was paralyzing her. This new perspective helped her be more compassionate toward others, creating a space where everyone felt comfortable opening up. David, in turn, began celebrating the small victories of his team, recognizing that each step toward change was an achievement. Their paths were not linear. There were days when Emily felt insecure and questioned her decisions, and days when David felt that the team's resistance was insurmountable. However, the connection they formed, both with each other and with others, became a crucial support. The deep conversations during Emily's meetings and David's open sessions created an atmosphere of trust and understanding. In one of those meetings, Emily shared with her group how vulnerability can be a powerful strength. She talked about the challenges she faced, such as the fear of failure and the pressure to fit into others' expectations. The group, in turn, responded with similar stories, creating a cycle of support and growth. David, inspired by this sharing, began bringing his team's victories and challenges to the meetings, showing that change was an ongoing process and that everyone was in this journey together. Over time, both began to see the impact of their actions. Emily felt more confident and strong, capable of facing her fears and insecurities. David noticed that the resistance in his team was decreasing as more people felt comfortable expressing their opinions and contributing. The transformation of Emily and David was not only personal, but also touched the lives of those around them. They learned that true wealth was not measured in material success, but in the connections they created. These experiences shaped them, and both emerged stronger and better prepared to face the challenges that life still had in store for them. The journey of overcoming and growth continued, but now with new perspectives and a solid support network. The atmosphere in the bistro was charged with tension. David was preparing for the most important meeting of his career. After weeks of implementations and attempts at change, he had realized that his team's resistance was not just a matter of distrust in his ideas, but also a reflection of the fear of losing what they already knew. He knew he needed to approach this differently, but doubt consumed him. What if no one listened to him? What if he failed to inspire them? Meanwhile, Emily was in a support group reflecting on her own journey. The words of encouragement she had shared with others made her realize that she needed to face her fears head-on. She knew David was going through a tough time and decided that she needed to be by his side. The friendship they had built over the months was strong, and she wanted him to know that he was not alone. With a racing heart, David began the meeting. He looked into the eyes of each team member, trying to convey sincerity and a genuine desire to collaborate. He took a deep breath and decided to be honest. He started, his voice a little shaky, saying that he knew the changes he was proposing had been difficult for all of them. But he wanted them to know he was there to listen. He also had fears and insecurities, and that was something they all faced. The room fell silent. David saw some skeptical expressions, but also noticed curious looks. He continued, saying he wasn't there to impose anything but to build together. They needed to find a way that worked for everyone. Their opinions mattered, and each one of them was essential for that to happen. At that moment, Emily entered the room, realizing the meeting had already started. She hesitated for a moment, but determination made her move forward. She apologized for interrupting, her voice firm despite her nervousness. She said she was a friend of David and had been following his journey of self-discovery. What he was doing there was more than changes at the bistro. It was about finding strength together. David looked at her in surprise, but something in his gaze indicated that he was grateful for her presence. Emily continued, saying that she had faced many fears and insecurities herself, and what she learned was that vulnerability connects us. They didn't need to have all the answers, but they could seek together. Emily's words brought a new atmosphere to the meeting. David and she were not just talking about changes, they were talking about creating a safe space for everyone. One team member who had always been resistant raised his hand. He confessed that he had also been feeling insecure. Changes were scary, but perhaps if they could talk about it, they could find solutions that worked for everyone. David felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. He realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for. Exactly. Let's open the space for you to share what you think. What can we do together to make everyone feel a part of this? The meeting quickly transformed into an open dialogue. People began to share their concerns and ideas, and the resistance that had previously hung in the air began to dissipate. David and Emily listened attentively, asking questions and validating each contribution. By the end, everyone agreed to create a plan that included the team's suggestions, making the change a collaborative process. When the meeting ended, David felt a wave of relief. The tension that had consumed him had given way to a feeling of hope and camaraderie. He knew there was still much work ahead, but now he had a team willing to build something together. Emily smiled at him, and in that moment both understood that true transformation was not just about individual overcoming, but about the strength that comes from unity and mutual support. As they walked out of the room, David reflected on his journey. He realized that each failure had been a learning opportunity. True wealth was not in achieving material success, but in cultivating genuine relationships and an environment where everyone could thrive. Emily, for her part, felt that each step she had taken had led her to a stronger place where vulnerability became a powerful ally. Their journey did not end there. New challenges would arise, but now with the certainty that together they could face them. What had begun as an internal struggle transformed into a celebration of friendship and collective strength. They were ready to move forward, not just as individuals, but as a team. After the meeting, David felt light, as if an immense weight had been lifted from his back. He walked through the bistro, watching his team interact with a new sparkle in their eyes. Conversations flowed, laughter was exchanged, and the previously tense atmosphere now pulsed with energy and optimism. It was a clear sign that what had happened in that room had created a new understanding among them. Emily approached David, still smiling. She asked if he had seen how everyone opened up. They were ready to listen. They just needed a little push. David nodded, still surprised by the change. "Yes, and I couldn't have done it without you. Your courage gave me the strength I needed." He looked around, observing team members enthusiastically discussing the next steps of the project. It's amazing how vulnerability can bring people together. "Exactly," Emily replied. "No one needs to have all the answers. The beauty is in seeking solutions together. That's what makes a strong team." As the conversation continued, David noticed that each of the collaborators was beginning to feel part of the process. He remembered the weeks of frustration and the weight of doubt that had accompanied him. Now he understood that challenges were part of the journey and that openness to dialogue and listening was essential. It was a lesson he would carry for a lifetime. That night, as David closed the bistro, he reflected on what had happened. He sat at one of the tables, watching the city lights through the window. The bistro was more than a workplace. It was a space where people gathered, shared experiences, and created bonds. He wanted everyone there to feel comfortable being who they truly were, without fear of judgment. The next day brought new ideas. David proposed a weekly meeting where everyone could share their suggestions and concerns, creating a continuous space for dialogue. The team welcomed the idea enthusiastically, and he saw that resistance had transformed into collaboration. They were ready to face the challenges ahead, together. Emily became a constant presence at the bistro, helping David implement the changes. She dedicated herself to creating a training program for the team, encouraging personal and professional development. The friendship between them deepened, and David realized that besides being colleagues, they were allies in building a healthy and productive work environment. As the weeks went by, the bistro began to flourish. The clientele grew, and comments about the welcoming atmosphere and the united team became frequent. David and Emily felt proud of what they were building. Open conversations and mutual support became the foundation of this new phase. One night, after an especially busy day, David and Emily were organizing the last details before closing. David turned to her and said, "I never thought I could feel so much satisfaction at work. Seeing the team so happy makes everything worth it." Emily smiled. "And you made that happen. Sometimes we just need a little courage to take the first step. And you had that courage." David paused for a moment, reflecting on his past insecurities. "I learned that fear is not an enemy, but a sign that we are trying to grow, and that by sharing that fear with others, we find strength." The night was bidding farewell, and the soft light from the bistro's lamps illuminated the space with a warm glow. David realized that each small challenge overcome had brought forth a new version of himself. He was more confident, more open, and, most importantly, more connected with his team. As they prepared to close, David felt a wave of gratitude. He knew that the journey didn't end there. New challenges would arise, but now he was more prepared than ever. With Emily by his side and a united team, he felt they could face anything. The transformation they began to experience was not just about the bistro. It was about the life they were building together, filled with friendship, support, and a promising future. Over time, David saw how his team transformed. He remembered the difficulties they faced, the doubts that lingered in the air, and the resistance that existed before. Now, all of that felt like a distant echo. The courage he found by opening up to his team not only strengthened the bonds between them, but also transformed him into a stronger and more empathetic leader. He realized that true success was not just about profits or growth, but about creating an environment where everyone felt valued and heard. The bistro became a place where ideas flourished and creativity was celebrated. The team, once hesitant, was now full of enthusiasm and ready to tackle new challenges. David felt like a conductor, leading a symphony of voices that came together in harmony. He learned the importance of listening and being vulnerable, understanding that vulnerability is, in fact, a powerful strength that creates deep connections. One night, while they were arranging the tables, Emily commented on how the change in the environment impacted not just work, but each person's personal life. David realized that this transformation had also happened to him. He had become more confident, more open to friendship and collaboration. The fear that once paralyzed him was now a drive to grow and learn. It was then that an old rivalry, which David thought he had left behind, resurfaced. A former co-worker, who had always doubted his abilities, started spreading rumors about the bistro. David had the opportunity to give in to anger and the desire for revenge. However, instead of acting impulsively, he decided to use this situation as a chance to demonstrate his growth. It was in an open meeting that David chose to confront the situation. With his team and customers present, he addressed the rumors transparently and honestly. He not only defended his work, but also showed how the team had united around a common goal. The result was impressive. The community rallied even more, standing up for the bistro and its team, and the rumors dissipated. David felt victorious, not for revenge, but for the way he responded to adversity. He understood that true power lay in standing firm in his principles and in a supportive environment. This not only strengthened his leadership, but also solidified the friendship between him and Emily, who had become an essential partner in his journey. Together, they showed that unity and courage can transform not just a workspace, but also the lives of the people who inhabit it. Reflecting on everything he had experienced, David realized that personal growth was a continuous journey, and that each challenge brought a new lesson. He learned that success goes beyond numbers. It's about the impact one has on the lives of others, and the relationships built along the way. The bistro, once just a workspace, had become a symbol of friendship, resilience, and transformation. Now David invites everyone to reflect on their own journeys. Each person faces challenges that may seem insurmountable, but it is in vulnerability and unity that we find the strength to move forward. Share your experiences and reflections in the comments. Your story might inspire someone who needs the courage to take that first step. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories that teach us about life. The time to act is now.